Sometimes the country will eat it, sometimes Walmart will eat it, and sometimes there'll be something to pay.
Walmart's CEO warned that Trump's tariffs would raise prices for Americans, a hidden tax. But Trump fired back, telling them to eat it. Now the US faces one of its biggest economic standoffs, and in this video, we break down how Trump wants you to pay for his tariffs. Trump's reaction. The bombshell that McMillan, the CEO of Walmart, dropped wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet, it was about the real impact that Trump's aggressive tariff policies were having on everyday Americans. While Trump had been parading around, claiming that his tariffs would bring jobs back to America without costing consumers a dime, McMillan was about to pull back the curtain on the ugly truth that the administration had been desperately trying to hide.
President Trump and his top economic aides have repeatedly said that Americans will not pay the cost of tariffs. In fact, last week, Lutnick said people have to drop the, quote, silly arguments that consumers would pay the cost. But over the weekend, as you know, the president posted that Walmart should eat the tariffs and not charge the value customer anything.
This damning statement from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt perfectly captures the contradictory nature of the Trump administration's messaging. Here we have the administration's own spokesperson admitting that Trump has been telling Americans they won't pay for tariffs, while simultaneously demanding that companies absorb these costs themselves. The logical inconsistency is so glaring that it's almost impossible to believe these people are running the country. McMillan's devastating announcement came with a stark warning that would send ripples through every American household. Given the magnitude of the tariffs, even at the reduced levels announced this week, we aren't able to absorb all the pressure given the reality of narrow retail margins. The higher tariffs will result in higher prices. This wasn't just corporate posturing, this was the CEO of a company that serves over 150 million customers weekly across 4,600 plus stores, telling the American people that Trump's policies were about to hit them where it hurts most, their wallets. But here's where the story gets absolutely insane. Instead of acknowledging the legitimate concerns raised by one of America's most influential business leaders, Trump's reaction was so tone-deaf, so completely divorced from economic reality, that it left economists and political analysts scratching their heads in disbelief. Just 2 days after McMillan's announcement, Trump took to Truth Social with a message that would define the entire controversy. Walmart should stop trying to blame tariffs as the reason for raising prices throughout the chain. Walmart made billions of dollars last year, far more than expected. Between Walmart and China, they should, as is said, eat the tariffs and not charge valued customers anything. I'll be watching, and so will your customers. The audacity of this statement is absolutely staggering. Here was the President of the United States publicly pressuring a private company to absorb costs that his own policies had created, while completely ignoring the fundamental economics of how tariffs actually work. But what makes Trump's reaction even more outrageous is the context in which it occurred, and how his own words in other settings completely contradict his demands.
They're able to do that.
When you say that Walmart should eat the cost of the tariffs, is that an acknowledgement that it is U.S. companies that bear the brunt of tariffs, not foreign countries?
Sometimes the country will eat it, sometimes Walmart will eat it, and sometimes there'll be something to pay, something extra. I've always been a fan, and I've always believed, and if you look, take a look at what I did 4 years ago with
This explosive admission from Trump himself reveals the complete contradiction at the heart of his tariff strategy. In this moment of honesty, Trump basically admits that American companies like Walmart do bear the burden of tariffs, directly contradicting everything his administration had been telling the public. When pressed by reporters about who actually pays for tariffs, Trump casually admits that sometimes there'll be something to pay, something extra, essentially confessing that his previous claims about foreign countries paying were complete lies.
So we had the greatest economy, and we had no inflation. Remember that. We had no inflation, and yet we had hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs that I put on China, yet we had no inflation, we had no big cost differential. Oftentimes, and I don't like it when a department store, because they'll do a lot of business, but you know, they announce record profits and everything else. They have to take out some of their profits. They'll make a little bit less money. But I don't want the consumer. I don't want the consumer.
This rambling response from Trump reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of economics and his complete disregard for how businesses actually operate. His suggestion that companies should simply take out some of their profits and make a little bit less money ignores the basic reality that public companies have fiduciary duties to their shareholders and can't just absorb unlimited costs to satisfy presidential demands. plans. The tariffs that McMillan was warning about weren't small fees. They were massive economic weapons that Trump had deployed as part of his trade war strategy. We're talking about a 30% tariff on Chinese goods, reduced from an absolutely crushing 145% rate, and 10% tariffs on imports from dozens of other countries. For a company like Walmart, which relies heavily on imported goods to maintain its famous low prices promise, these tariffs represented hundreds of millions of dollars in additional costs. But Trump's response revealed something even more sinister about his approach to governance. Rather than engaging with the legitimate economic concerns that McMillan had raised, Trump chose to launch a public attack on one of America's most important employers, threatening to mobilize customers against the company if they didn't comply with his demands.
Well, first of all, the CEO of Walmart made those comments about the tariffs on an earnings call where CEOs, I believe, are legally obligated to give the most dire warnings and forecasts to their investors and stakeholders. The reality is, as the president has always maintained, Chinese producers will be absorbing the cost of these tariffs. And that is why China was so quick to hustle to the negotiating table with the United States of America.
This response from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is absolutely mind-boggling in its dishonesty. She's essentially claiming that McMillan was legally required to lie to investors about the impact of tariffs, while simultaneously maintaining the fiction that Chinese producers would absorb the costs. The cognitive dissonance required to make these contradictory statements in the same breath is truly staggering.
They need our markets, they need our consumers, and I would again point you to the inflation report that came out last week showing that inflation is declining, in large part because energy prices are dropping across the board in this country because of the president's robust energy agenda that he has taken since January 20th. So the president is committed to ensuring that prices remain low for American consumers, and he maintains the position that foreign countries will absorb these tariffs.
The brazen dishonesty in this statement is absolutely breathtaking. Leavitt is trying to spin declining energy prices as evidence that tariffs aren't causing inflation, completely ignoring the fact that tariffs primarily affect manufactured goods and food imports, not energy. It's a classic misdirection tactic designed to confuse the public about the real impacts of Trump's trade policies. The timing of this confrontation couldn't have been more perfect for exposing the hypocrisy at the heart of Trump's trade policies. For months, Trump and his economic advisors had been telling the American people that foreign countries would pay the cost of tariffs, despite overwhelming economic evidence to the contrary. But when faced with the reality that American companies and consumers would actually bear the burden, Trump's solution wasn't to reconsider his policies. It was to bully businesses into hiding the true costs from the American people. What makes this story even more explosive is the broader context of McMillan's relationship with Trump. This wasn't some liberal CEO looking to score political points against a Republican president. McMillan had actually been working with the Trump administration, even meeting with Trump multiple times to discuss trade relations and economic policy. He had been trying to work within the system to find solutions that would benefit both American workers and American consumers. But this wasn't McMillan's first clash with Trump over matters of principle. Back in 2017, following the violent white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, McMillan had courageously spoken out against Trump's failure to unequivocally condemn racism and hatred. Even then, McMillan had shown that he was willing to put principle over politics, even when it meant potentially alienating the most powerful man in America. The economic earthquake that shook Washington. To truly understand the magnitude of what Doug McMillan unleashed when he made his bombshell announcement, we need to examine the economic forces that had been building beneath the surface for months. Trump's tariff policies, implemented as part of his aggressive trade war strategy, had been creating unprecedented pressure on American businesses, but most corporate leaders had been reluctant to speak out publicly about the real costs. The numbers behind Trump's tariff regime are absolutely staggering. The National Retail Federation estimated that these policies could cost American families an additional $78 billion annually. That's over $1,200 per household every single year. But Trump had been masterfully spinning these policies as victories for American workers, claiming that foreign countries would foot the bill while American jobs flourished. But here's where Trump's own words come back to haunt him. When pressed about the specifics of his tariff policies during press conferences, Trump revealed his complete ignorance about how these economic weapons actually work in practice.
Mr. President, on Apple, you said this morning that if they don't make their iPhones in the U.S., you're going to hit them with a 25% tariff. Right. Do you have the power to tariff one single company? And why would you want to hurt an American company in that way?
It would be more. It would be also Samsung and anybody that makes that product. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair. So anybody that makes that product, and that'll start on I guess the end of June it'll come out. I think we have that appropriately done by the end of June.
This exchange reveals Trump's casual approach to imposing massive economic penalties on companies, treating tariffs like they're simple policy tools that he can deploy without consequences. The reporter's question about hurting an American company goes to the heart of the contradiction in Trump's tariff strategy. These policies don't just affect foreign competitors, they devastate American businesses and consumers.
So if they make that product, now again, when they build their plant here, there's no tariff. So they're going to be building plants here. But I had an understanding with him that he wouldn't be doing this. He said he's going to India to build plants. I said, that's okay to go to India, but you're not going to sell into here without tariffs.
Trump's admission that he had an understanding with Apple reveals the corrupt nature of his tariff policies. He's essentially admitting that these supposedly principled trade measures are actually just tools for extracting personal commitments from CEOs. It's crony capitalism at its absolute worst. This statement from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt perfectly captures the contradictory nature of the Trump administration's messaging. On one hand, they were insisting that Americans wouldn't pay for tariffs. On the other hand, they were literally telling American companies to eat the costs of those same tariffs. The logical inconsistency is so glaring that it exposes the fundamental dishonesty at the heart of Trump's trade rhetoric. But Macmillan wasn't making his announcement in a vacuum. He was responding to real pressures that were already hitting Walmart's bottom line. The company's CFO, John David Rainey, had been witnessing firsthand how these tariffs were affecting everything from electronics and toys to basic food staples like bananas, avocados, and coffee. Reality was that tariffs on countries like China, Costa Rica, Peru, and Colombia were driving up costs across Walmart's entire supply chain. What makes Macmillan's position even more courageous is the context in which he made his announcement. Walmart had actually been working overtime to mitigate the impact of these tariffs, investing heavily in domestic sourcing and absorbing costs wherever possible. The company had committed to purchasing $296 billion from U.S. suppliers and had pledged an additional $350 billion over the next 10 years. They had been doing everything possible to support Trump's America First agenda while protecting their customers from price increases. But there's only so much that even a company as large and powerful as Walmart can absorb. The magnitude of Trump's tariffs, particularly the 30% rate on Chinese imports and 10% on goods from other countries, was simply too massive for any retailer to handle without passing some costs along to consumers. Macmillan was essentially being forced to choose between lying to his shareholders about the company's financial outlook or telling the truth about the real impact of Trump's policies.
What makes you confident, sir, that Apple can build in the United States at a price that American consumers?
Oh, they can. No, they can.
This bizarre exchange where Trump contradicts himself in the same sentence perfectly captures his confused understanding of manufacturing economics. He claims Apple can build products affordably in the US, then immediately says they can't, revealing that he has no coherent vision for how his policies would actually work in practice.
A lot of it's so computerized now. These plants are amazing if you look at them, but they can do that. And actually, as you know, Apple's coming in with $500 billion. So are the chip companies. We have all of the chip companies coming in. The biggest, $500 billion, $200 billion, $250 billion they're spending. But we're talking about the iPhone now, and the iPhone, if they're going to sell it in America, I want it to be built in the United States.
Trump's rambling about computerized plants and throwing around massive dollar figures without any context reveals his superficial understanding of global manufacturing. He's essentially making policy based on wishful thinking rather than economic reality. The fact that Macmillan chose transparency over political expediency speaks volumes about his character, especially considering his history of trying to work constructively with the Trump administration. This wasn't a CEO looking to score cheap political points. This was a business leader who had reached his breaking point with policies that were fundamentally undermining his company's ability to serve American consumers. The immediate market reaction to Macmillan's announcement revealed just how significant this moment truly was. While Walmart's stock initially held steady due to the company's strong fundamentals and diversified business model, the broader retail sector began to feel the tremors of what Macmillan had unleashed. Other major retailers like Target, Home Depot, and Costco were suddenly being asked by analysts and investors about their own exposure to tariff-related costs. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this entire controversy is how it exposed the fundamental gap between Trump's political rhetoric and economic reality. Trump had been telling his supporters that his tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to America without costing consumers anything. But Macmillan's announcement forced everyone to confront the mathematical impossibility of this promise. The most damaging moment for Trump came when reporters pressed him directly about the contradiction between his claims and reality.
You say that Walmart should eat the cost of the tariffs. Is that an acknowledgement that it is U.S. companies that bear the brunt of tariffs, not foreign countries?
Sometimes the country will eat it, sometimes Walmart will eat it, and sometimes there'll be something to pay, something extra.
This rambling response reveals Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of how businesses operate. His suggestion that companies should simply accept lower profits to shield consumers from his policies ignores the basic reality that public companies have fiduciary duties to their shareholders. The economic data that Macmillan was working with painted a sobering picture of what American families could expect. Products like electronics, toys, clothing, furniture, and even basic food items were all facing significant price increases due to tariff pressure. For a company that built its reputation on providing everyday low prices to working-class Americans, these cost pressures represented an existential threat to their core business model. What makes this situation even more outrageous is that Trump's own Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, had privately acknowledged that Walmart would need to pass some tariff costs on to consumers. But instead of publicly acknowledging this reality, the administration chose to maintain the fiction that companies could simply absorb these costs indefinitely. The human cost of this deception cannot be overstated. Walmart serves over 150 million customers every week, many of whom are working families who depend on the retailer's low prices to stretch their budgets. When Trump demanded that Walmart eat the tariffs, he was essentially asking the company to choose between financial sustainability and customer affordability, a choice that no responsible business leader should have to make. The explosive aftermath and what it reveals about power. Trump's response came swift and brutal, delivered through his favorite medium of Truth Social with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But what makes his reaction so telling isn't just the aggressive tone, it's the fundamental misunderstanding of corporate responsibility and economic reality that it reveals. Trump wasn't just attacking Macmillan, he was attacking the very foundations of free market capitalism.
What does he mean by "I'll be watching" to Walmart?
He'll be watching, seeing what they're doing.
This ominous threat from Trump reveals the authoritarian impulses that lie beneath his populist rhetoric. The idea that a sitting president would publicly threaten to monitor a private company's pricing decisions is absolutely chilling and represents a fundamental departure from traditional American principles of limited government and free enterprise. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when reporters pressed Trump about the broader implications of his tariff policies for other major American companies. His responses revealed a pattern of economic intimidation that extends far beyond just Walmart.
But why impose tariffs that you know are hurting American businesses?
They're not hurting, they're helping because they're creating jobs in America. We're creating tremendous amounts of jobs in America like you've never seen. We're having investment in America. We're not getting ripped off by every country in the world.
This delusional response shows Trump's complete disconnect from the reality of what his policies are actually doing to American businesses. He claims tariffs are helping American companies, while simultaneously demanding that those same companies absorb the costs to avoid raising prices on consumers.
Where we've been ripped off by every country in the world. They're making their product, they sell it. They don't give our people the jobs. They make them with other countries' jobs. And we will have something that nobody will ever see again, I think. I think we have a potential to do numbers that we never envisioned in the wildest year. Look at
Trump's rambling about achieving numbers that we never envisioned while providing no specifics reveals the fantasy-based nature of his economic policies. He's making massive policy decisions based on vague promises rather than concrete analysis.
Look at what's happening. 10 to 12 trillion dollars in literally a couple of months. It's nothing like that's ever happened. It's we're doing a very special thing. We want, if they're going to sell it here, generally speaking, not for all products. There's some products we don't want to make. And frankly, we're much better off getting them elsewhere.
This incoherent rambling about $10 to $12 trillion with no context or explanation perfectly captures Trump's confused approach to economic policy. He throws around massive numbers without any understanding of what they actually mean or how they relate to his tariff policies. But the most shocking aspect of Trump's response was how it completely ignored the legitimate concerns that Macmillan had raised. Rather than engaging with the economic realities of his tariff policies, Trump chose to attack the messenger and demand that Walmart simply pretend those realities didn't exist. It was a perfect example of how political expediency had completely replaced sound economic policy in Trump's decision-making process. The reaction from other business leaders was swift and telling. During a private meeting at the White House in April 2025, CEOs from major retailers including Target and Home Depot had apparently expressed similar concerns about tariff impacts. According to reports, Macmillan had even told Trump directly that his tariff policy was not good for anybody, but Trump had chosen to ignore these warnings until they became public. What makes this story even more explosive is how it fits into a broader pattern of Trump's relationship with corporate America. This wasn't the first time that Macmillan had found himself at odds with Trump over matters of principle. Back in 2017, Macmillan had courageously criticized Trump's response to the Charlottesville violence, stating that Trump had missed a critical opportunity to help bring our country together by unequivocally rejecting the appalling actions of white supremacists. The fallout from that earlier confrontation had been relatively muted, with Trump calling Macmillan a very nice guy, making a political statement. But the 2025 tariff dispute revealed a much more aggressive and vindictive side of Trump's personality, one that was willing to use the full weight of presidential authority to pressure private companies into compliance. The economic implications of this confrontation extended far beyond Walmart's quarterly earnings. Consumer confidence had already been declining due to concerns about inflation and economic uncertainty, and Trump's public feud with America's largest retailer only added to those anxieties. Consumer sentiment fell 2.7% between April and May 2025, partly attributed to tariff-related recession fears. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this entire controversy was how it undermined Trump's credibility on economic issues. For months, Trump had been claiming that his tariffs would benefit American workers without hurting American consumers. Macmillan's announcement forced everyone to confront the mathematical impossibility of this promise, and Trump's response revealed that he had no coherent plan for dealing with the obvious contradictions in his policy. The international reaction to this domestic dispute was equally telling. Trading partners around the world were watching carefully to see how the Trump administration would handle the obvious failures of its trade policy. When the leader of the free world is reduced to publicly bullying private companies to hide the costs of his own policies, it sends a clear message about the sustainability and credibility of those policies. Former Walmart US CEO Bill Simon added another layer of complexity to the story by arguing that Walmart actually could absorb the tariff costs. Simon pointed to Walmart's 25 basis point increase in US gross profit margin and suggested that the company had room to handle tariff impacts without raising prices. This created an interesting dynamic where even within the business community, there were differing opinions about Walmart's options. But Macmillan's response to these criticisms revealed the depth of his commitment to transparency and accountability. Rather than backing down from his position, Walmart issued a statement reaffirming their commitment to low prices while acknowledging the reality of their constraints. "We have always worked to keep our prices as low as possible, and we won't stop. We'll keep prices as low as we can for as long as we can, given the reality of small retail margins." Companies like Costco and Best Buy had already begun raising prices on certain items to offset tariff costs, making it clear that Walmart's situation wasn't unique or isolated. What makes Macmillan's stand even more remarkable is the personal risk he was taking. As the CEO of America's largest private employer, with 1.6 million US workers and operations in communities across the country, Macmillan had every incentive to avoid public confrontation with the president. The fact that he chose to speak truth to power despite these risks speaks volumes about his character and his commitment to his customers and employees. The vindictive nature of Trump's response became even clearer when we examine his broader pattern of threats against American companies that dare to challenge his narrative. During the same period, Trump was making similar demands of other industries, revealing a systematic campaign of economic intimidation.
But for certain products, we want cars. We want to make cars. We don't want to have, and I like Canada very much, but we don't want to have Canada making our cars. We want to make our cars.
This casual dismissal of long-standing trade relationships with allies like Canada reveals Trump's reckless approach to international commerce. He's willing to destroy decades of economic cooperation based on simplistic nationalist slogans rather than complex economic realities. The pattern of Trump's authoritarian demands became even more disturbing when reporters pressed him about his threats to universities and other institutions.
Are you considering stopping other universities besides Harvard from accepting foreign
Well, we're
students?
taking a look at a lot of things. And as you know, billions of dollars has been paid to Harvard. How ridiculous is that? Billions. And they have $52 billion as an endowment. They have $52 billion. And this country is paying billions and billions of dollars and then gives student loans and they have to pay back the loans. So
Trump's incoherent. Rambling about Harvard's endowment reveals his complete misunderstanding of how universities operate and his willingness to use federal policy as a weapon against institutions he doesn't like. The connection between student loans and Harvard's endowment makes no logical sense, but Trump uses it to justify potential punitive actions.
Harvard's going to have to change its ways. And so are some others.
On that note, a lot of CEOs in the United States, big companies, are foreign. What is that going to do?
I'm fine with that. No, I'm fine with that. No, we want to do that. We're actually going to be doing something in the near future that's going to make it possible for people to come into this country and come in and, have a road toward citizenship.
This bizarre pivot from threatening universities to discussing immigration policy shows Trump's scattered thinking and inability to maintain coherent policy positions. He goes from threatening educational institutions to promising citizenship pathways in the same breath. That brings us to the end of this story. For more interesting clips like this, click on the cards on your screen.